I stood alone beside my mother's deathbed while my family vanished. Then a nurse handed me a sealed letter that changed everything. The air in the room was thick with grief and the sterile scent of hospital antiseptic. I had just whispered my final goodbye to the woman who had given me life, only to find myself abandoned by the very people who were supposed to be by my side. My siblings, my father. They had all disappeared, leaving me in the silence of that hospital room. But what could a letter possibly contain that would explain their absence? With trembling hands, I opened it. The words inside sent a chill down my spine. Trust had been shattered. Betrayal ran deeper than blood. And nothing was as it seemed. That letter would unravel the truth. The house felt hollow. No one was left to fill the spaces, not even with the well-meaning words of distant relatives or the comfort of familiar faces. My mother's funeral had passed like an inevitable storm, dark and heavy, but over far too soon. It was the quiet afterward that gnawed at me. The sounds of the world had dulled, like I was hearing through water. No laughter, no argument, no casual chatter. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. The empty rooms of our family home, once so full of life, now echoed with a kind of oppressive silence, the kind that presses in from all sides, smothering everything. I stood on the porch, hands in my pockets, my gaze drifting over the yard. The grass had grown unruly, the garden untended, as though time had been abandoned here too. A few dead leaves clung to the edges of the flower beds, offering the only sign that the season still turned. I wanted to feel something, anything, but all I could summon was the cold numbness that had settled in my chest. My family had vanished, gone back to their lives, their obligations, or maybe to escape the weight of the questions that hung in the air. I hadn't asked, they hadn't offered. I was adrift, tethered only by the memory of my mother's voice, now reduced to echoes in my head. And that letter, that damn letter. I was lost in thought when I heard the crunch of gravel beneath tires. A car pulled up in the driveway. Unexpected, unwelcome. Detective Laura. She stepped out of the car, her figure cutting through the haze of my thoughts like a sharp blade. I hadn't seen her since the funeral, and even then, our exchange had been minimal. There was something about her quiet authority that both unsettled and grounded me. "Miles," she said, her voice soft but firm. She offered no apology for her intrusion, but her eyes seemed to acknowledge the weight of the moment. "We need to talk." Detective Laura's arrival wasn't a surprise. Not really. I knew something had been off since the moment the letter had been handed to me. My mother's death hadn't been a peaceful passing. It had been the calm before a storm, the kind of silence that only precedes chaos. "Victor Blackwell's been arrested," Laura said, standing just inside the front door. She was still dressed in her dark blue uniform, a stark contrast against the light gray of the house's interior. "Charges include murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." I didn't flinch, but the word struck harder than I expected. Victor Blackwell. The name held weight, yet it didn't entirely make sense. The man had been my mother's colleague, a man who had helped her, until he didn't. Until the lies came out, until everything we thought we knew crumbled. "Dramatic capture," Laura continued, her gaze meeting mine with quiet precision. "He didn't go down easy, but that's not why I'm here." She glanced toward the table where my mother's papers had been scattered. The binder sat there, still untouched. It had been tucked in with my mother's personal effects, a collection of notes, photographs, and other documents. I hadn't dared to open it, not yet, but Laura didn't need to explain. I knew. "Eleanor knew something," she said, her voice dropping lower, almost reverent. "She left something behind for you, something important. But it's not just for you, Miles. It's for everyone." The respect between us hung in the air like an unspoken agreement. She wasn't here to accuse, but neither was she here to offer comfort. Her quiet respect mirrored my own. We both knew too well that the answers lay buried somewhere in that binder, and what they might reveal could either save or destroy everything. The silence stretched between us, thick with the unasked questions. Laura turned slightly, her gaze flickering toward the binder again. "I think it's time we find out what your mother left for you." I nodded. Slowly. The quiet dread had settled in my stomach now, the gnawing awareness that the truth was closer than ever. The kitchen door creaked open, and we stepped into the garden. The air was warmer here, the remnants of a late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the overgrown grass. The garden had been a passion of my mother's, a place of beauty and quiet reflection. But now the flowers were wild, untamed, just like the confusion swirling in my head. I lowered myself onto the stone bench beside the garden's edge, instinctively starting to pull weeds from the flower beds, as if the simple act could restore some order to the chaos. My fingers worked in silence, pulling stubborn weeds from the dirt, while the quiet buzz of the world filled the space around us. Laura joined me, standing at the far end of the garden, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She seemed at home in the quiet, as if this was the kind of place where things slowed down long enough for truths to surface. "I've been chasing Victor Blackwell for years," Laura said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, matter of fact, but there was a weight behind the words. "He's elusive, slippery, but he's always had a way of slipping through the cracks. The system, the law, everything we've done to pin him down? It's been like chasing shadows." Her words hung in the air, the weight of her frustration mingling with the warmth of the late afternoon. I nodded slowly, not sure what to say. Victor Blackwell had always seemed like a distant figure to me, someone my mother knew but had kept at arm's length. Now that distance seemed to stretch across everything. "You know, Eleanor saw something in him long before the rest of us did," Laura continued. "She was the one who started putting the pieces together, the one who knew he was more dangerous than anyone realized. She was brave, Miles. I think she understood more about people than anyone gave her credit for." I paused, my hand stilling as I looked at Laura. My mother, brave? It didn't quite align with the image I had of her, the gentle, soft-spoken woman who had shielded us from the darker parts of her life. "She was brave enough to face the truth," Laura said, as if reading my thoughts. "She had insight. She knew what Blackwell was capable of, but she didn't back down. She started gathering information, making connections, and before anyone knew it, she had a trail that led us here." I wasn't sure what to make of Laura's words. It was as if she was talking about someone else, someone far stronger and more formidable than the mother I had known. But as I stared at the wild garden, I felt something stir within me. Perhaps there was more to my mother than I had ever understood. Perhaps there was more to me too. I picked up a small trowel and began to dig, clearing away the overgrown weeds and turning the soil. It was an instinct now, a way to create some kind of order in the midst of everything falling apart. The earth beneath my hands felt grounding, like it could offer some kind of balance. As I worked, I realized this wasn't just about the garden. It was about me, about growing, evolving, and untangling the mess of secrets my mother had left behind. "You're right," I said quietly, the words feeling heavier than I expected. She was more than I ever gave her credit for. Laura didn't reply immediately, but I saw the faint nod she gave, as if acknowledging a quiet shift between us. The garden seemed to mirror that change. What was wild and chaotic could still be nurtured, still be made to bloom. I didn't expect anyone else to arrive, but when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel again, my stomach twisted in anticipation. The car pulled up slowly, almost deliberately, as if it had been carefully timed. Two figures emerged, Olivia and Thomas. Olivia. I hadn't seen her in years, but I recognized her the moment she stepped out of the car. She had worked with my mother for a long time. Though I had never known the full extent of their relationship, there was something in the way she moved, the quiet confidence in her demeanor, that made me feel like she held answers that I desperately needed. Thomas stood beside her, his face unreadable, his presence grounding in its own way. He was more distant than Olivia, but he had always been supportive of my mother, especially in the early days of her work. Olivia came toward me with a purposeful stride, her eyes meeting mine with a kind of intensity I hadn't expected. "Miles," she said softly, "I'm sorry for everything, for your loss, but there's something your mother wanted you to have." She handed me a small flash drive and a folded note. The weight of it in my hand felt heavier than I anticipated, like a key to something I wasn't ready to understand. "Your mother, she knew things," Olivia said, her voice steady, Things about her work, about Victor Blackwell, about the truth that needed to come out. She left this for you. She wanted you to know. I unfolded the note, my heart racing as I read her words. Miles, the legacy I leave behind isn't just in the documents you'll find or in the work I did. It's in you. It's in your ability to carry the truth forward even when it's hard. Trust what you know. Trust what you feel. The world is messy, but you've always had a way of seeing things clearly. My chest tightened as the meaning sank in. This wasn't just about uncovering the secrets of my mother's life. It was about embracing the responsibility that came with it. My mother had entrusted me with something far bigger than myself, something that would change everything. Your mother was more than just a colleague, Olivia added, her voice lowering. She was a friend, and she knew what she was leaving for you. But it's up to you now, Miles. You have to decide what to do with it. The words felt like a burden and a blessing all at once. I could feel the shift in me, an internal change that I wasn't quite ready for, but that was already taking root. The weight of the flash drive in my hand was no longer just a physical thing. It was the weight of my mother's legacy, a responsibility I couldn't ignore. Olivia's eyes softened. She believed in you. Now it's your turn to believe in yourself. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the future pressing down on me. But for the first time since my mother's death, I felt something else. A sense of purpose. A sense of direction. The flash drive felt heavier than any piece of technology should, as if it were holding all the secrets of the world inside. I plugged it into my laptop, heart hammering in my chest. The files it contained were nothing short of a revelation. It didn't take long before I understood why my mother had kept these things hidden from the world and why she had left them for me to find. There were spreadsheets, encrypted documents, and a series of emails spanning years. Most chilling of all were the audio recordings dated back to the early days of my mother's involvement with Victor Blackwell and the others. As I scrolled through the files, one thing became abundantly clear. My family, the people I'd trusted most, had been complicit in something far darker than I had ever imagined. Harper, Theo, and Sienna, the people who had once been my pillars, who had once shared laughs and late-night conversations, were the ones who had betrayed my mother. They had known about Blackwell's illegal dealings, his manipulation, and his criminal network. They had been involved in covering up his tracks, allowing him to slip through the cracks of justice time and time again. Each file painted a damning picture, showing their active participation in a web of lies and deceit. My mother had tried to expose them, tried to warn me, but they had silenced her, made her question her own sanity, and in the end, they had pushed her away, isolated her in her own home. She had never given up, though. She had been gathering evidence, piecing together the story, the truth, that would eventually bring them all down. But as I clicked through the final documents, I realized something that stopped me cold. Harper, Theo, and Sienna had not just been involved, they had betrayed my mother in the worst possible way. They had been Blackwell's closest allies. They had manipulated her, convinced her to cover up crimes that went far beyond financial fraud. And in doing so, they had severed the most sacred bond between us. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, my mind swimming. My family had not just vanished in the aftermath of my mother's death. They had retreated into the shadows, unwilling to face the truth they had helped create. Their betrayal was now exposed for the world to see, and yet there was no contact from them. No apology, no explanation. They had become ghosts in my life, and I was left to pick up the pieces. The media frenzy started within hours. News outlets ran stories about the family scandal, the fallout from my mother's investigation, and the exposure of Blackwell's criminal empire. Public opinion was swift and unforgiving. Harper's career as a corporate lawyer was dismantled overnight, her clients fleeing as the scandal spread. Theo's reputation as a successful investor crumbled, and Sienna's position as a trusted philanthropist became a joke. They were all targets now, their lives laid bare for the world to judge. But I couldn't bring myself to revel in their downfall. I couldn't gloat over the mess they had created, the pain they had caused. The truth had come to light, but it hadn't come with any satisfaction or sense of justice. It was just a grim reality, one that had left me standing alone, just like I had been when my mother died. Victor Blackwell's plea deal came next. The deal was more of a formality than a surprise. His conviction was swift, a predictable result given the weight of the evidence my mother had collected. Blackwell's smug demeanor faltered as the charges were read out, but he never showed a true sense of remorse. He took the deal, admitting to a portion of his crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence. I watched it all from the sidelines, as if the world were happening in slow motion. The courtroom, the reporters, the cameras, they all felt like a blur. I could barely focus on anything other than the gnawing emptiness inside me. This wasn't a victory. This wasn't the closure I'd been hoping for. It was just the end of a long, painful chapter. And even then, it felt like nothing was truly resolved. Through it all, Laura and Olivia remained constant. They were the only ones who had been there for my mother when I wasn't. Laura, with her unwavering dedication to justice, kept her distance from the chaos that surrounded me, but I knew she was always there, ready to support me when I needed her. Olivia, with her quiet strength and knowledge of my mother's work, had become a friend I could lean on. They didn't expect me to heal quickly. They didn't try to rush me. They understood that the storm I was caught in wasn't just about my family's betrayal or Blackwell's conviction. It was about something deeper, something that had been brewing inside me for years. While the world outside erupted in judgment and scandal, I turned inward. The garden became my sanctuary. I worked there every day, slowly, methodically, as if planting seeds could somehow ease the ache inside me. I realized then that my mother's legacy was more than just exposing the lies and the criminals. It was about cultivating something real, something lasting, something that didn't depend on other people's approval or betrayal. I wasn't interested in vengeance or in dragging the people who had betrayed me into the light just to watch them burn. What mattered now was what I would do with the truth I had inherited. What mattered was the growth, the quiet rebuilding of my own life, my own sense of self, and that, more than anything else, was the legacy my mother had given me. I returned to the construction site not because I had to, but because I needed to. The work was simple, stripped back to the most basic elements of labor: brick, mortar, steel. No complicated schemes, no mysteries or betrayals, just the raw, tangible task of building something from nothing. The sounds of saws cutting through wood, hammers driving nails into place, and workers talking in the background were the soundtrack of a life I could understand, a life I could control. Elena was still with me. She had been my mother's right hand for years, and even after everything, she chose to stay. She didn't ask questions or offer pity. She just showed up every day, her presence steady and grounding. It was a comfort to see her there, her quiet determination reminding me that some things were built to last. She had worked for my mother through the highs and lows, and now, through this uncertain period, she was here for me too. The team had shrunk, of course. Many had moved on, either out of loyalty to my mother or out of fear that they would be caught in the wake of the scandal. But the few who remained were the ones who understood the value of hard work, of honesty, of doing something real. The work wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what I had once imagined I'd do with my life, but it was honest. And that's what mattered now. I didn't hesitate when I made the decision to rename the company. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about creating a new foundation, both literally and symbolically. Eleanor's Legacy Construction was born out of the need to honor my mother, to remind myself that her vision for the future, for something bigger than the betrayal she'd suffered, still had power. It was a reset, a refocus. My mother had believed in the power of rebuilding, not just structures, but people, communities, and lives. This company would be a testament to that. We didn't stop there. I used the funds my mother had set aside in her final years to create Eleanor's Fund, a charitable initiative dedicated to supporting community projects and small businesses in areas that had been neglected, forgotten, or abandoned. The idea was simple: invest in the future by nurturing the present. Small grants, microloans, and volunteer opportunities would help communities that had been left behind. Ones just like the one I had grown up in. The first projects we funded were small, but they made a tangible difference. A local youth center got the funding it needed to reopen its doors. providing a safe place for kids after school. A local food bank received donations to expand its reach to more families. We helped a few local artisans open up small shops, giving them the chance to showcase their work. These weren't world-changing feats, but they were signs of hope, of something good rising from the wreckage. It wasn't just about the projects or the funding, it was about the relationships, the connections we were building. In every meeting, in every handshake, I saw something I hadn't realized I'd lost: trust. There was a trust that had been broken by the actions of my family, but here, in this new space, I was learning to rebuild it, piece by piece. The physical work of construction mirrored the emotional labor I was undertaking. It wasn't glamorous or easy. There were days when I felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I would look at the half-finished buildings, the piles of bricks, the lines of people working together, and wonder if it would ever be enough. But then, I would see the results. The first walls going up. The first projects coming to life. And I knew that the rebuild wasn't just a job. It was my life, and it was happening. One small victory at a time. Emotionally, I began to repair too. The pain of my mother's death, of her betrayal by those I once called family, was still there, but it was quieter now. I wasn't running from it. I was working through it. The garden I had once tended was now being mirrored in the work site, a place where things could grow again even after they had been broken down. I wasn't the same person I had been before, but I didn't want to be. I wanted to be someone who could build things that mattered, who could make a difference, even if it was small. It wasn't an easy path. There were days I felt like I was moving in circles, chasing the ghosts of the past. But as the first real signs of progress started to show, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. Hope that the work we were doing was real. Hope that I could make something lasting. Hope that, with enough time, the emotional wounds might begin to heal alongside the physical labor. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was alone in the work. Elena was there, steady, as always. And in the quiet moments when the world outside felt overwhelming, I felt the presence of my mother, not as the woman I had once known, but as the legacy she had left behind. It was a legacy I was learning to honor, one brick at a time. The memorial garden at the hospital had finally been completed. What had started as an idea born out of my mother's quiet wish to leave something behind that honored her life had transformed into a space of peace. It wasn't large, but it was beautiful, simple, yet profound. There were flowering trees and benches, winding paths lined with vibrant plants, and a central water feature that whispered gently in the background. The garden was designed to feel like a sanctuary, a place where people could reflect, find peace, and perhaps find some measure of healing. The ceremony day arrived with the same stillness that had defined the last several months. The air was crisp, the sky a pale blue, and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze added to the atmosphere of quiet reverence. It was a small gathering, not the kind of public event that would attract throngs of people, but it didn't matter. The people who were there were the ones who truly understood the meaning of this garden. Olivia and Thomas stood together near the entrance, their presence a comforting reminder of the work we had all done to reach this point. Olivia, in her usual understated way, wore a soft smile as she watched the garden that had been created in my mother's honor. Thomas stood beside her, his usual stoic demeanor softened by the warmth of the moment. Laura was there too, standing a little apart from the group, her expression quiet but proud. She had been a steady presence throughout everything, through the investigation, through the grief, through the painful revelations. Today, she was simply here, not as a detective, but as someone who understood the importance of this moment. I stood at the front, hands shoved in my pockets, watching the gathering crowd. A few hospital staff, some old colleagues, and a handful of community members who had supported my mother's work over the years. There weren't many, but that didn't matter. The people who mattered were here. As I stepped forward to speak, the weight of the moment pressed against me. I hadn't prepared anything. There was no script to follow. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I knew this moment was important. Not just for me, but for everyone who had supported this garden. Everyone who had understood that the past, no matter how painful, could be the soil for something better. The microphone felt unfamiliar in my hand as I spoke, but the words came easier than I expected. This garden, I began, my voice steady but soft, is more than just a place of remembrance. It's a place of growth. My mother believed in that. She believed that no matter how many times we were knocked down, we could rise again. We could grow. We could rebuild. And we could heal. I paused, looking out at the faces in front of me, then continued. I didn't always understand that, not until everything changed. But now, standing here, I can see it. This garden, these flowers, these trees, they symbolize that. They're a reminder that life, even in its hardest moments, has the potential to bloom. And it's not just about the people we lose, it's about the people we still have, the people who stay, the ones who help us grow. My eyes moved to Olivia and Thomas, then to Laura, who stood just a little to the side. There are people who come into our lives and change everything. My mother was one of those people for me. She taught me, in ways I didn't always appreciate, that truth and loyalty are what we hold on to when everything else falls apart. And even when the world seemed to turn its back on her, she never gave up on those values. I'm here today because of that. The breeze picked up then, rustling the leaves of the trees and causing a few petals to fall, as if the garden itself were acknowledging my words. There was something almost symbolic about it. The way the petals fluttered gently to the ground, like a soft reminder of my mother's spirit, her courage, her commitment, her strength. I took a deep breath, the weight of the speech slowly lifting as I finished. This garden is her legacy, but it's also mine. And it's yours too. It's for everyone who believes that we can rebuild, that we can grow from the hardest times, that we can bloom. The crowd was quiet for a moment, but the air was different now, lighter somehow, as if the earth had absorbed some of the pain, leaving a space for something more hopeful. Olivia was the first to step forward, her voice low but firm. Eleanor would be proud of this, Miles. She would be proud of you. Her words felt like a quiet affirmation, the kind of reassurance I didn't even realize I needed. Laura followed, her eyes reflecting the same sentiment. You've done something remarkable here, Miles. Not just with this garden, but with everything. Eleanor's legacy, your legacy, is something to be proud of. I nodded slowly, the weight of those words settling over me. This wasn't just about the garden. It wasn't about the past or the betrayal or even the work that still lay ahead. It was about how far I had come. It was about the people who had stood with me and the strength I had found within myself. The petals continued to fall, gently floating to the ground, while the breeze whispered through the trees. In that quiet moment, I realized something profound. The pain would always be a part of me, but it was no longer the only part. The rest, the hope, the growth, the future, was mine to embrace. And it was enough. The air was still, the ceremony now fading into a soft murmur behind me. I held Eleanor's letter in my hands. The very same letter that had begun this journey. Her handwriting was unmistakable, the ink slightly faded, but the words still sharp with purpose. The weight of it felt both heavy and fragile in my hands, like a final connection to everything I had lost, and everything I was learning to rebuild. Thomas stepped beside me, holding something in his hand. I didn't have to ask what it was. He passed me her pen, a simple silver fountain pen, worn smooth by years of use, and a blank page. The gesture was wordless, but its meaning was clear. It was my turn to write. Go on, Miles, Thomas said, quietly. She'd want you to. I looked at the pen, then back at the garden, my heart pounding in my chest. Laura's voice interrupted the moment, soft but concerned. Are you okay? She asked, standing a few paces away. I met her gaze, the question hanging in the air like an unspoken truth. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of the past crushing me. I didn't feel lost or hollow. I am, I said, my voice steady. I think I finally am. I stepped away from the crowd and into the heart of the garden, walking slowly down the path as the petals continued to fall. The space was quieter now, the weight of the day's emotions settling into something gentler, more peaceful. My thoughts drifted as I breathed deeply, inhaling the soft scent of roses, letting it fill my lungs as if it could cleanse the remnants of the past that still clung to me. In the silence of the garden, I found something I hadn't expected: peace. It wasn't final or all-encompassing, but it was there. And for the first time, I felt it settle around me. I sat on one of the benches, the letter and pen resting in my lap. I didn't know what I was going to write yet. I just knew that I needed to. I began to write my own letter. Not to anyone in particular, but to the future, to myself, to the person I was becoming. The words came slowly at first, but then they flowed, as if I had been holding them back for far too long. Dear future, I wrote. I'm not sure where we'll end up, but I know that I'm learning how to move forward. The past will always be part of me, but I've stopped letting it define me. This garden, this work, this life, it's all about growth, and I'm ready to keep growing. I'm learning to trust again. I'm learning to forgive. I'm learning to live without the weight of things I can't change. I hope that when you read this, you'll know that I did my best. I chose to build something, no matter how hard it got. I chose to rise, and I hope I never forget to keep rising, even when it's hard. I paused for a moment, the pen hovering above the page before finishing. With hope. Miles. I sat there for a long time, feeling the weight of the pen, the weight of the words, but also the weight of the silence. The garden around me felt alive, not just in the way the flowers bloomed, but in the way it had witnessed everything I had been through. I had been rebuilding, bit by bit, and it was starting to feel like enough. I stayed there for a long time, writing, breathing, watching the roses sway gently in the breeze. The world was still. The silence transformed. The air, once heavy with grief, was now filled with possibility. And in that space, I felt something shift. What had started in grief had led to something more. Growth, understanding, and the quiet strength that comes from accepting both the past and the future. Healing wasn't something that could be checked off a list. It was a daily practice, a choice to keep moving forward, no matter how slow the progress. And in that moment, surrounded by the garden that had been planted with hope, I knew I would keep moving forward, quietly, slowly, but with a rooted faith in truth and in myself.